I am pretty excited to bring this story to you. I'm about to get not only a history lesson on this '07 Renault, but Alan Travis is going to start it up for me. We're going to hear it run. He's going to take me for a ride. And boy, is that a privilege I don't deserve, but I'm looking forward to it. So thank you in advance, Alan, and here we go. I hope you enjoy this story. All right, I'm here with Alan Travis, and he's standing in front of his 1907 Renault. And I'm not going to even pretend to know much about it, but I can't wait to have him explain what this car is all about. So Alan, take it away. What is this car exactly, and how did it originate? And let's get started.
All right, well, this is a 1907 Renault AI race car. I can exaggerate and say it won the first Le Mans in '06 in November. W.K. Vanderbilt watched the first Le Mans. The Renault won the race, not because it was the fastest, the Fiat was the fastest, but it had demountable tires, and it had 4 of them, so it won the race. W.K. Vanderbilt, sort of the wealthiest person in the automotive genre at the time, ordered 9 of these because there's nothing like this in America. So this is one of those 9. So this is actually a replica car made by Renault in February of 1907.
Okay.
So it's a factory race car, but it wasn't the one that won Le Mans, and that one still doesn't exist. It's 15% smaller, but as far as a race car, it's over 500 cubic inches.
Okay.
It's got a 4-speed transmission. It's got a 2-to-1 ring and pinion.
Okay.
And it's purpose built. It holds 16 gallons of hot water as far as a radiator, and 2.5 gallons total loss oil system on the dash.
Okay.
So it's made to go super fast.
One quick point. When you said 15% smaller, this car is 15% smaller than the original race
Yes.
car? Okay.
Yes.
Just want to be clear on that.
The first one was a K, and these are AIs.
Okay.
And they made about 10 of these AIs,
Uh-huh.
and most of them are more or less in the chassis form with not much more than some seats and a radiator and a gas tank, and some were used just as that. This one was taken to Brewster. Mr. Guggenheim, this was given to Mr. Guggenheim by W.K. Vanderbilt, and Guggenheim went to Brewster and added a few fenders and a cover for the bronze gas tank. The bronze gas tank is beautiful, and if you were going to market it as a beautiful racing car, I guess you could take the fenders off and the valance that's over the gas tank. But this has always been this way, always. And if 100 or 200 years from now somebody wants to take that valance off and the fenders off, go for it.
Right.
But we're keeping it together.
Right. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier. You said that this car has been kind of kept complete and honored its whole life. Like, it's not been restored in that sense, right?
Right. It's never been a derelict car. It's always been extremely honored because there's nothing really ever been made to go faster. You know, you got over 500 cubic inches of 4-cylinder motor, and you've got a 2-to-1 ring and pinion. You cannot do a multiplier mathematically and make anything go faster.
Right.
So how fast does it go? It'll go at least 90 miles an hour. We were racing it 10 years ago at Laguna Seca, and we got it to 75 or 80 on the racetrack even. This weekend we went probably 75 mile an hour, and right now I just unloaded it from the trailer from going to Visalia, California for a 4-day rally. We went about 400 miles. So it just unloaded from the trailer now, and that's what we're gonna see. And it didn't give 1 second a problem the entire time. So we went 5 miles an hour to 75 miles an hour everywhere that we needed to go. Every hill, up every steep hill, and down every steep hill. It did everything perfectly. We didn't tow any other cars or do anything like that, or any river crossings, but it performed flawlessly, as it's pretty much done its 116-year history.
That's fascinating. So is there any idea of, we know how old it is, do we have any idea how many miles have been put on it? Is there a way to know that?
No, if any car could have 1 million miles on it, I mean, we've got the history back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and it's always been used.
Yeah.
And it's always been driven hard. And with all of the notations I have from about 1930 on, nobody's ever taken the motor apart even. At least they've made no mention of it.
Right.
It's got giant journals in the motor. It's got a beautiful oil system that that produces and flows 2.5 gallons of oil by a dripper system that the mechanician would adjust when you go down the road. And it just is perfect. It's got a Magneto, so it has no electrical system, but the Magneto itself has got centrifugal advance, so you don't even need to retard it. And can you start an over a 500 cubic inch 4-cylinder motor by hand crank? You can, because it's got a compression release even. So 2 or 3 times a day I can pull that up and make that start.
Isn't that something?
Somebody also added in the 50s an electric starter, so lots of times I'll hit that button too,
right,
to save my arm.
Yeah.
But you can even hand crank it.
That's amazing. Well, where do we start looking at this thing as far as getting a tour of kind of some of the details?
Well,
of
let's
this
look
car?
at the engine. Let's look at the cockpit first.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of razzle dazzle from my eye, anyway.
So on this side, you see a speedometer that goes to 100 miles an hour.
And that's this guy right here. Okay.
And then you see a tachometer speedometer that's good for 4th gear. And you notice that it's 100 mile an hour is 1600 RPM, and that's what it is.
I see. Right. So in that exact gear, it gives you a speed representation, and I guess you can do some calculations from that if you want.
Right. But in 4th gear. But the problem with this big of an engine and big of a car, you need to be going 60 mile an hour to put it in 4th gear because it's 2-to-1 ring and pinion.
Okay.
So you would never dream a car that's 116 years old, you need to go at least 60 mile an hour to put it into drive. But it's 2-to-1 ring and pinion. There's nothing in the world with a 2-to-1 ring and pinion.
Right. Wow.
Maybe a Bonneville salt flats car.
Right. Okay, and this looks like a clock here.
That's
I
a
guess.
clock.
Uh-huh.
I didn't wind it today.
Okay.
That's my fuel pressure for the gravity feed.
Oh, okay.
And I can also pump it on the side too. So if I'm going up a hill and I don't have enough pressure, this is my mixture control. I can adjust my mixture for richer and thinner.
Okay.
If I want.
Interesting. Okay.
This is my fast idle and slow idle. I can pull that up and move it back and forth.
Oh, okay.
This is my oiling box, 2.5 gallons. And then there's a glass sight tube in the center of it. And right now it's about half full because I filled it before yesterday's run. So we still use probably a 3/4 of a gallon on it.
Okay.
You fill it by this cap there.
Okay.
And then when it's running, all those drippers, you see the drips coming down those drippers.
Yeah.
And those drippers feed each portion of the engine. So you know you're getting oil for sure. You also have a big sump, and then there's splash going on too, but you have positive visual that you're getting oil exactly where you want it in that.
Wow, so each one of those represents a different circuit of oiling?
That's
Is that
correct.
How you'd put
That's
it?
correct.
Wow.
And this is considered a total lost oil system. Laguna Seca, which I'll show you in a minute, requires that I not dump 2 gallons of oil on the racetrack. So I do have a catch tank underneath, which when I open the engine, I'll show you that.
Okay. Imagine them not wanting you to dump gallons of oil. Okay.
And then this is the rear brakes.
Okay.
And you have it on your foot too. This is the 4-speed transmission.
Okay.
And the neat thing about the 4-speed transmission, it's like a motorcycle transmission. It's called progressive. So you move it, each gear you just go forward, 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 forward.
Yeah.
So there's no H pattern whatsoever.
Okay.
You simply move it, and reverse is push the button in like a modern car and pull it back, and you're in a reverse.
Yeah, a little safety lockout that way. Okay.
So,
wow. All right, let's keep moving.
This is how I pump up my tank. So I have pressure if I have low amount of gravity, i.e. because the gas tank is too low. The gas tank is a beautiful bronze gas tank.
Okay.
And it's round. It's inside of this. If this box wasn't put on in 1908 or 1909 by Brewster, you would see the gas tank on the back.
Right. Brewster, the coach builder. Okay.
And then on when the K model, which is the one that this is copied from, the one that ran the Le Mans in 1906 that won Le Mans, and this was made in 1907. This is an AI. It had 4 spares, so this has 4 spares too. Right now for this weekend, 2 spares was fine, and we didn't even use those.
Okay.
But we do have 4 spares. The suspension is a leaf spring suspension. It handles what great, as you're going to see in a little bit. It long leafs, and it's got the right amount of leafs in it. I don't know that any of them have ever been replaced. They just work perfectly. It's 2 sets of springs.
2 sets, okay.
Yeah, 2 sets, so it can go back and forth.
Okay.
And that was somewhat of a common design from the time. This has got Arizona plates on it, and for Arizona, we were not a state for another 6 years later.
That's right.
So for Arizona, this is called a pre-state plate. Okay. And what you would get is you would get telegraph pole numbers, put it on a leather backing. You would put Arizona on there so they knew what state you were from. Okay. And that is a legal plate because it's a period plate. One thing of note, it's got a giant rear end in the car, and that's common to a normal car. But in this era, if you had this much horsepower, you would have a chain drive. Right. Renault is the first manufacturer with giant motors to come up with a rear end that can take the horsepower. So this is a pretty amazing car to have a rear end instead of a chain drive rear end.
Tell me, those lights, there's 2 lights and they're different looking. How are they different?
This is a kerosene light.
Okay.
So this is simply, you put kerosene in it and you light it, and it illuminates the car a little bit. Okay. We drive this, and it's been driven for 100 and some years. Yep. So there's an electric bulb in there.
I see. Okay.
So that's just so we can have a legal stoplight and tail light. And this is the original kerosene type light. Okay. Whether this one has always been on there or not, we don't know, but it's the right one. Okay. It's the right type.
Very good.
This is the quick fill gas cap, a bronze brass gas cap. This is our storage, so we can put our junk in there. Right. We can put our, our jackets and our clothes, and nobody's remade that. It's pretty much the way it's always been for the 100 and some years. This is a Gabriel Horn. So a Gabriel Horn is an air horn, but this is about the biggest one you've ever seen. Right. And you need to be going down the road about 70 miles an hour. Okay. You simply you let off the throttle, and you pull up the Gabriel horn, so all that back compression goes through the Gabriel, and it's louder than a train horn. So, wow. but you need all of the engine. Okay. All 500 and some cubic inches to power through that for it to sound.
Wow. And the design kind of reminds me of the old pipe organs as far as...
Yeah, well, that's what it is. Yeah. And then it's got enough volume from the engine because of the engine size being so large, it can do it. Okay. This is my registration and certification from Monterey. Okay. For the racetrack Laguna Seca, and probably I'm the oldest certified race car. I've never seen it on an older car before, so it's, you normally see that on the 60s and the 70s car. Right. This is a legal race car, and it's 116 or 17 years old.
That's great. That is great. Okay.
And this is the key to start it. So it's simply you have your castle on the other end of it, so you can open up your house. And this is your car key. Right. You simply push it in and turn it, and now your mag is making connection. Got you. Okay. And then these are the most interesting placards that I've ever seen in a car. Okay. This was this is this car as it was made, and this is the serial number of this car. So this came with this car, and this is the race car without the fenders and without the gas tank being covered. Wow. So get a zoom in on that. Yeah. That is beautiful. Yeah. That is crazy. Awesome. And you notice it says built for the American colonies and Cuba. So this was built in France, and France, I think, generally knew that we were our own country, but right. But Renault thought we necessarily weren't our own country and thought Cuba was part of it. So normally we don't see a delivered to the American colonies in Cuba. Well, there was that Spanish-American War back in the late 1800s, yeah. I guess, complicated things. I guess they didn't tell them that we won or right. Or they left. Or yeah, right. It wasn't quite clear. So let's cover our bases here. All right, and there's a couple more plaques. There's another Monterey plaque up there, I see. Yeah, that's from completing. But yeah. So that's not real. That's real from Monterey, but right. but the other ones, these are the ones that are delivered from the car.
Okay.
You know, I
That'd be
said
like a modern number plate.
it is. It's like the VIN number.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about it, these were only generated for the American audience and generated because of W.K. Vanderbilt.
Oh.
So he ordered 9 of these. That's what the story goes. And there's a list of the famous people that got these cars.
Okay.
And these were all kind of a bare bone chassis, so they're all a little bit different, but they're all AIs.
Okay.
So they're all 2-to-1 ring and pinions. They all have the same motor, and this is the only one that's VCC certified that today that's completely complete.
Okay.
But they're all a little bit different. And a Vanderbilt Cup race car actually never really probably raced. Mr. Vanderbilt, there was no paved roads in America in 1906, 1907, so he created the first paved road called the Vanderbilt Loop, Vanderbilt Cup course, which is 50-some miles in the Long Island area.
Okay.
And then the super wealthy people that got these cars were simply driving around that, and other cars raced the racetrack.
Interesting.
So even though these are considered race cars, probably not.
Kind of gentleman's race car, right?
I think so. And then I've got a really neat picture of Mr. Guggenheim in this car on top of a bridge. And then Ralph Mulford, which is one of the Indianapolis race car winners from 1909, 1910 area, is upside down underneath the bridge in the water. And then Mr. Guggenheim is parked up there on top with this one, and you see the fenders and the valence and all.
Right.
And then it's labeled on there, this is Mr. Guggenheim just checking out Ralph Mulford, who wrecked his car down below. So that's a beautiful picture.
Wow.
And someday I'll have a big version of it hanging up in my garage. That's pretty neat.
That's fascinating. Wow. All right, continuing on here, there's another gauge here we didn't mention. I don't know what that is.
This is how you adjust your carburetor.
Oh.
It's for your air pressure and for your altimeter. So you can adjust your mixture on your carburetor back and forth.
And that'll give you a display reading of what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, a better judge of it. That's the person that won the first Grand Prix at Le Mans driving the Renault. So these came with that as radiator ornament, which is pretty neat.
That is.
I haven't seen any others of those. There might be more of those. I'm sure there's more of those. But this one has its radiator ornament.
Nice.
So you simply unthread that and add to your 16 gallons of hot water.
Wow. Okay.
But the interesting thing is there's 3,200 of these tubes, these copper tubes inside of this.
Individual tubes there.
And this is the original radiator, probably never rebuilt. It cools the car even today.
That's crazy.
You can't make it pretty because it's got a giant amount of tubes in there, yet it doesn't leak and it still works.
And we're talking about in Arizona where you're driving it these days.
Anywhere. It keeps it cool. The steepest hill, the longest run. You know, we did the great race with this in 2013, and we had 400-mile days. And you never think about it overheating. It never does anything wrong.
It's having to cool 500 cubic inches.
Right.
Or what? That's
but
amazing.
It just does fine.
And it's never failed on you anyway.
No,
for sure.
The cooling system hasn't ever.
That is wild.
This is when I said on the VCC certified.
Yeah.
That's a big deal to have on your car. That means in England, they've done a 5-year process and they've decided that your car is a legitimate car.
Okay.
And that was done on this car in the 50s, when cars they weren't putting together derelict cars to get them created. You know, they were looking for real cars.
Right.
And then this got certified, 70 some years ago.
That's amazing.
As being the real car.
Yeah.
The AIs that W.K. Vanderbilt brought to America were all imported by the same person, which is one of those placards on the dash has got his name on it.
Okay.
And this is in the middle of all those serial numbers, which is just interesting.
Yeah.
But so there's no specific one of these that's any different other than they're all kind of the same chassis.
Sure.
But so this one has really neat French lights on it, and this is almost like a lighthouse would have with all the different lenses.
Oh, yeah.
And they're acetylene lights. So how do you get acetylene back then?
Yeah.
They didn't have welder shops. But what you do is you dropped carbide pellets in water,
Okay.
or water dripped on carbide pellets, which would generate acetylene gas, and that's done in that cylinder back there.
Oh, that's what that does. Okay.
And then that feeds these with acetylene gas. And when these are lit, after about 4 or 5 minutes, they're incredibly bright. I mean, they're unbelievably bright.
Really?
So it takes a while, but they're dangerous. So when you get done driving and you're back at your house at 10 o'clock at night, and you're going to put it in the barn, you can't park it inside the barn because it continues to generate acetylene gas for hours and hours and hours.
Oh, there's no off switch. There's no way to...
No way to stop the process. So what you could do, you could loosen up the lights and with the bail handle, take them off, leave them outside, and take your carbide generator off and park it in the barn if you really wanted to.
Right.
That's why it's got the bail handles on it.
Wow. Okay, that explains that. Right, because there's actual function. They're not just a beauty hoop.
Yeah, they're not a beauty hoop.
Wow. Okay, now obviously there's your engine crank handle down
Yep,
there.
and this is the compression release. So you
Okay.
can crank it, you could.
Yeah.
So I'll open up the engine compartment.
Let's do that.
So Renault has got a very unique system with a radiator behind the engine. There's a fan on the flywheel that sucks the air and pushes it through. You can also open up this
Look
for
at
racing and get more air directly on if you want.
that.
I never seem to do that, but we can't really go fast enough. You know, this car is good enough. We could break every single speed limit in America except for maybe Montana.
1907, I mean, what were the fastest cars generally built in America in this time?
A normal production car that a person would have would probably be 25 or 30 miles an hour.
Right.
And they're all 3 to 8 horsepower in general.
Right, right.
And then this is 60 to 90 horsepower. And that's a taxable horsepower, so it's probably more than that.
Right.
But it only spins 1,500 RPM, as you'll see.
Okay.
But 1,500 RPM, the torque is unbelievable. You know, it'll accelerate very fast at no RPM. Just poof, poof, poof.
Wow. All right, so here we are. Let's have a little tour of this engine compartment.
So this is the engine. This is the Magneto. Magnetos were just starting in 1906. Just a couple years later was the first ones that they really had at all. That's the original one, and it's got centrifugal advance to it. A Magneto is a few windings of wire, and there's magnets in there and brushes.
Okay.
And as the armature spins and as the connection breaks on the points, it creates a spark.
Okay.
And by advancing and retarding the drive to it, you can make it spark earlier or later based on what you need.
So is it replacing both a coil and distributor that way?
That's correct.
Okay.
So you don't need a battery for this at all.
Wow.
So this doesn't use a battery, other than I have a battery so I can put the electric starter on.
Right.
But other than that, it has no battery at all to make it run. It runs on gravity and fuel pressure, which is not really fuel pressure, it's air pressure to the gas tank. But you got 37 gallons of gas in the gas tank. That's enough pressure to push it to the carburetor anyway.
Ah, right, just the pure weight of it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
So that's what this box is here. That accelerates and deaccelerates the movement of the centrifugal for the Magneto.
all right.
This is the compression release. So
Okay, and then
that's
you can see how it's operating there into the engine.
That's released the pressure, which is on the exhaust valve, and then that's to run.
Okay.
When you start it, you in fact I'll show you how you start it. I won't start it maybe, but
Okay.
you carry this in your console,
Okay.
and that's gasoline.
Okay.
So when you start it, since there's no accelerator pump, you simply put a little bit there.
So each cylinder has its own little
Those
starter
are primer cups.
primer cup. Thank you. That's what I needed to know. Okay.
So now it's primed.
Okay.
So I don't know for certain I'm in neutral. So I'm going to go ahead and sit inside of it and hit the starter.
Okay. And I'll try to not stand in front.
Don't ever stand in front of a really early car.
Right. It's a good rule to live by.
Yep. And continue living by. So again, I think it's in neutral.
Okay.
But we moved it.
Wow. Starts right up. Instant.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Man, the smooth, quiet idle. Okay, so
If you come over here, you'll see the oil drippers. You see the drops coming down.
oh yeah, look at that. Wow, this is amazing. Wow. I'm impressed. I mean, obviously that it has a strong sound to it, but it seems so smooth
Yep.
for being a, especially early four-cylinder.
Right.
Now, I have a question for you.
Okay.
It's being so smooth, it makes me wonder about the crankshaft. Does it actually have a balanced crankshaft? Or do you know?
No. But four-cylinder is kind of balanced to begin with.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, in general.
yeah.
And it's not spinning a lot.
Right.
It'll idle down to 50 RPM.
Wow. Yeah. That's so. It just has good design and
Yep.
good oiling.
So I'll show you.
Uh huh.
So if I can start it.
Wow. Look at that. Beautiful. That is fantastic. And the exhaust runs along this side, it looks like,
It's in the back.
to the back. Wow. That is fantastic. You know, it's not exactly what I expected, and I love it. I didn't know what to expect as far as exactly how it would sound, of course.
You would think an antique car would be antique-y,
Yeah.
you know, spindly and all that.
I expected more kind of a sputtery thing to happen or something.
This was a man's car. I mean, you have W.K. Vanderbilt driving it.
Right.
You have W.K. Vanderbilt ordering them. You have the biggest movers and shakers in the world getting these. This was amazing, and this was at a time when not 1 in 1,000 people had a car at all. And if they had a car at all, it went 20 or 30.
Right.
And you got this massive, purpose-built speed thing. And
Like from another world.
And then, what do you need a 90-mile-an-hour racing car when they haven't even got a road yet? They haven't even got a road yet.
Right.
So he had to make the 54-mile road, the Vanderbilt Cup course, just so he could drive his car and his other wealthy buddies could drive their car. You know, when you put yourself in first person or what it must have been like to have this, you know, there's something that kind of explains it a little bit in kind of a smug way.
Uh-huh.
This kind of says it all. It's a notice to the police. This car is equipped with a Jones speedometer, which it is, and the driver knows his speed. Don't arrest on guesswork. Because how is somebody going to decide from his horse
Right.
or his bicycle how fast this thing's going? You're not going to do that. And they thought at 60 mile an hour you couldn't breathe and everything under the sun. Right. And then if Guggenheim hadn't had Brewster put the windshield on it, because this is the only one with a windshield.
Oh, okay.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's like impossible to make. How would you make this with that so big as it is?
Oh my goodness, right.
But the other ones don't have a windshield. Mm-hmm. So this one you can breathe still, but you're going to be going down the road in a little bit at pretty high speed, and you're going to be amazed. It's going to be something you'll remember for the rest of your life.
I have a feeling you're right. Now, we mentioned the windshield. I'm noticing there's some adjustability.
You can, if we wanted it to go faster and leave the windshield on, we could flare the opening. We could bend the bottom this way or flare this out.
Okay.
We can do that.
So there's two hinges.
Yep.
It looks like, depending on what you want to do.
Yep.
And you can just leave it, of course, like this.
We're just leaving it. No matter what, on every tour that we go on, we're the fastest car. You know, and we're in the Horseless Carriage Club, so it's 1915 and earlier cars.
Yeah.
There's no 1915 and earlier car that will go faster than it.
Wow.
There's not any.
Yeah, that is so crazy. Wow, that's got to be addictive for you. That's got to be a lot of fun.
And and when you ride it, it's like you're in a Grand National stock car. It's like you've got more power under your feet than you can, and you can manage it. You can steer.
Okay.
You can brake. You can do all that stuff like your modern car.
Wow.
So you might think a Porsche 356 is really neat, and it is.
Right.
But this really grabs you.
One thing I wanted to just ask you real quick, since you talked about how this car in particular had removable rims, how many other cars had that feature back in that
In 1906, really none did.
Okay.
But shortly, by 1910, most of them did.
Okay.
I've got a 1906, 1907 French Rolls Royce in my collection, but it does not have demountable tires. So what's the difference? I have two spares on the side, but they're simply unaired, untubed tires.
Okay.
So it takes an hour or so to pull off, to cut off the original tire, and to manhandle that tire by hand. You're on the side of the road for an hour changing it.
Wow.
This one, if I really chant well, my wife can change the tire in 3 or 4 minutes, as long as I'm really on her.
Yeah.
Because she's the mechanician, I'm the driver.
Right.
So it's her job.
That's her job. Oh,
no,
man.
I don't make her change the tire when we're still going down the road. I don't make her do that.
That's good.
I stop.
That's very nice.
I stop.
You're very thoughtful.
Right. And then it's her job to get them off.
How often do you experience a flat tire?
Every 10 days of driving touring, I guess.
Okay.
We also experience wood wheels that are not happy, that are talking too much. I.e. the wood wheels are all separate spokes.
Yep.
And they start clicking a bunch. So this weekend, before we took it to our event in California, we found one rear wheel. The rear wheel on the right-hand side is the power wheel for most cars, because that's where the gear is on. So that takes the brunt of when you take off quick. So that one really torques the most. The other one's got the pinion, which has got a little bit of slack in it.
Right.
So it doesn't have the input that the right one does.
Sure.
So it was too loose.
I see.
So I went ahead and took off the wheel, and through the steel felloe, I pinned all of the spokes. And then because the spokes were a little bit loose, I wrapped nylon string on the inside of each of the spokes. So when the spoke would touch the felloe band, it was a nice cushion effect.
Okay.
And I didn't seal any of that. In fact, you can see that repair that I did. You can see my string inside. You know, I've got 400 miles on it since I repaired it that way. Since it held together perfectly, I'll go ahead and make that prettier now. But I wanted to leave it out to make sure that nothing was loosening it up. So each one of these I did that with. So they're pinned with a stainless steel pin from the felloe inside the spoke, and then the nylon string.
Interesting.
But I'll make it prettier.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a correct repair that they would have done 100 years ago too.
Interesting. That never even occurred to me that they would be separate spokes and all that. That's just fascinating as well.
And I don't know that they aren't still original wheels. You know,
Right.
They're old wheels.
Yeah.
They're kind of like petrified wood.
Yeah. They are very hard, I'm sure, at this point.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So are you game to give me a little ride on
I
this
sure
thing?
am.
All right. I'm game to take one. That's
All right.
fantastic.
Hop in.
I'm hopping in. My pleasure.
So go around the neighborhood slow.
Okay.
And it's got a clutch. The clutch is a leather cone clutch,
Okay.
but I can drive it smoothly. I can drive it as smoothly as any car. And you just think, how could you possibly drive a car this old smoothly? Well, you can. I know how, but
Yeah. There a little bit of practice and skill might enter into
Yeah.
it, but it's capable of it.